Hello, folks. Welcome to a very special Practical Shooting After Dark. Once again tonight, flying solo. The situation with the USPSA board kind of demands a little bit more discussion. So, I'll fly solo because no one else really needs to catch a ban over the USPSA drama situation. This episode, I want to talk about kind of some things that have happened over the last year, put some things into context for people, and answer a bunch of questions that I've been getting. So, as usual, lately, it should be a banger. Lots of drama. Anyway, the USPSA board has definitely brought the situation to a boiling point. I mean, things have gotten a little bit out of control. So, like I said, I want to take some time to explain to people how we got to this place, my role in it, our role in it, I suppose, as far as my associates and I. Anyway, a year ago, Matt Hopkins and I, we put out a video on YouTube. It was a pretty aggressive title, but if you actually watch the video, it wasn't really that spicy. The Matt Hopkins declares war on the USPSA BOD, or on the BOCs. I forget how we titled it. But anyway, this seemed like a good thing to do at the time. Matt was running for office for an area director slot and eventually a president slot. He was going to run for office. So a title like that is good, gets people's attention, a little bit of trolling. That's definitely very good on the internet. The reason that Matt wanted to run for office, and a lot of guys around the country have kind of gotten motivated, I should say. The board of directors, if you pay close attention, you'll notice they don't really take input. It doesn't really matter what the input is. You'll notice if people have feedback or criticisms or say, hey, what about this issue over here, anything like that, the board pretty much doesn't want to hear it unless, they want to hear it, which is entirely up to them. If you try to tell them something they don't want to hear, they will never hear it. It really doesn't matter how big of an issue it is or what way you say it or anything like that. They don't take input that they don't want to take. So a good way to kind of bust this system up or highlight this for people was to put out a public war declaration. Just make sure people know that there's opposition, puts the board on notice, gets people kind of wound up, and it kind of makes sure that the coming conflict, because Matt and I knew that there would be a lot of conflict with the board, wanted to make sure that the coming conflict would be public. Because if you've been paying attention the last year, you probably noticed that the board does a lot of stuff without really talking about it. There's a lot of questions they don't want to answer, things like that. In that sort of environment, that's where the board is happy. They like to function that way, kind of. You're not really asking questions. Things happen in executive session. We don't really talk about it. That's it. That's what they like to do. So the way you combat that is you push things into the court of public opinion, and you make sure that the conflict that you have is public. Now, Matt would have been a popular presidential candidate should he, if he had been able to carry on with the race. But that wasn't really the point. Matt didn't want to get elected to be president of USPSA to accomplish nothing. That's not what he wanted to do. He didn't want to win a popularity contest. And again, get elected and change nothing. That wasn't the idea. The idea is to actually change the way the organization functions, make it more responsive to people, make sure that the organization listens to the active members, things like that. That's what Matt wanted to do, and that again is why there's a public component to him running for office that was oppositional, that was sort of a little bit of trolling, had a lot of me trolling. That's why that stuff was important, to make sure people knew that there was going to be opposition. Both sort of observers knew and the board knew. And that was done to provoke some sort of response from the board. Almost immediately after the war declaration, the board started talking about changing the bylaws for the organization, for USPSA, to make it so that the president would not have any power over the organization, and instead that power would go to a managing director type of position that the board at large would appoint the managing director for the organization. So essentially what the board did was change the rules to make the presidential election invalid, or make it not matter. Now again, this wasn't really a big shock for Matt and I, but for a lot of the people watching, that kind of was a shock. And they didn't even want to believe that the motivations were that sort of it was that Machiavellian, that the board was really acting to just stop other people from having power. People didn't want to believe that. But eventually, a memo came out written by Bruce One, the infamous Bruce One memo, that explained, indeed, they were going to change the bylaws to stop Matt Hopkins specifically, and, maybe me someday, should I run for president, to stop other people from having any power in USPSA. That was the stated reason for doing the bylaw changes. So anyway, we made an issue of it in public to make sure people understood why that was happening. But at the end of the day, the board is the board, and they did change the bylaws to make sure that even if Matt won the presidential election, he couldn't have any power. But that wasn't good enough for them. After the bylaw changes, Matt actually needed to leave Area 3. He had a bad situation with the lady he was living in. He needed to get a new job. He needed to move. He needed to do a lot of things for Matt. So he did those things, and he couldn't tell anybody what was happening for quite a few reasons, including the board. When they found out that he'd left Area 3, they blackmailed him right out of the presidential race. They said they were going to kick him out of the organization. Once they suspend you, you can't be president either way. That's the way the bylaws are written. So, like me now, even if the board was to reinstate my membership for USPSA or allow me to shoot matches, I couldn't run for office for 5 years. That's the way they changed the bylaws. And, this was pointed out. So the way it worked for Matt is, if you don't get off the board, we're going to kick you out of the sport. If you don't get out of the race, we're going to kick you out of the sport. Blackmail. Just get rid of him. Just because Matt moved out of his area and didn't tell them about it, because if they found out about it, they were going to fuck him up. Matt couldn't tell anyone what he was doing for his personal reasons. So anyway, all that went down. And it's a little bit... Well, I should say this. Sherwin and Leighton, they're sick for their hand in that. And they understand why. But really, the members of USPSA are victims in stuff like this. When people, like the ordinary members, want things to change, they want different leadership, then the leadership you have in there changes bylaws and fucks people out of the races. So you can't change anything. You can't have a voice in the organization. Well, that's kind of a big problem. Like, people don't really like that. And another thing I should say is, a lot of the rhetoric in the last few months, it's gotten pretty personal. Like, we've been talking about people's personal financial histories, kind of some mean stuff. Like, we've been pretty mean to the board. I've been mean to the board, but that's not for no reason. Things got personal when the board made them personal. And now, again, like, they know they did this, but they don't like to talk about this stuff in public. But absolutely, the board made things personal, so, we'll escalate right along with them. And the fact is, the board will not allow outsiders to have power. They won't share power. They're basically just control freaks that kind of crush dissent. And that's the truth as I see it. Now, that's hard for people to believe, and that sounds nutty, or that sounds too extreme for a lot of people. Even people close to this situation have a hard time believing that. Even though it's true, if you kind of look at it from the outside and you look at how things actually work, it's pretty obvious what's going on. Like, for example, Matt, super nice guy, and he still can't understand how the board really functions. Even after they get him off the board, they blackmail him out of the presidential race, they get him to shut up in public, they still had a conversation when they did this round of suspensions or bannings. They still had a conversation about kicking Matt out. And Matt came to me, he says, I don't understand it. I did everything these guys asked, and they still want to kick me out. And I was like, yes, Matt. Yes, they do. These guys are nasty. They're spiteful. Like, they never let shit go. Even though they kind of, got rid of you, they still want to hammer you just out of spite, because that's who they are. And it's difficult for people to see, and it's difficult for people to hear. But I'm telling you, it's true. Like, these guys are fucked. Anyway, now it's time to talk to the board, because they listen to all this stuff. The situation I see now, like I said, we can't change anything by voting. You guys don't take input. You don't listen. And the situation we have now is kind of at a boiling point because of the actions of the board. People like me, not just me, but people like me, have been created by the board. So we come to them with issues, quietly, privately, nicely. Then things escalate. We never get any resolution for whatever issues we have, whatever. Things just go on and on and on. and it gets to the point where it's in public and it's nasty. And most of it, like in my opinion, again, it's because the board, they don't fucking listen. They don't want to listen. And it's at a boiling point because of them. Over the last year, we've had tons of craziness. The Bruce 1 memo, the bylaw changes, we've had a deficit budget, we had the Cameo Nationals debacle. We've had stuff going on with Jake, like more stuff than I could even enumerate here. We've got selling shady merch, stalking insights. Apparently Brett Wally's getting death threats down in Florida by phone, getting death threats by phone. He thinks maybe it's Jake. The police are looking into it to prove it. I think apparently there's some disguise being done for the phone numbers. Anyway, all of these crazy things going on. I've been told that some balls have been started rolling with the IRS, and these balls can't be stopped. And the people who started them rolling, if they'd asked me, I would have told them not to contact anybody because I don't want USPSA in a bad spot. There's that going on. You have the Infinity guys apparently gearing up to lay down a lawsuit on USPSA because they're not happy with how things went. I put out the Kim Williams lawsuit documents recently. That's shown a lot of people how things really function with the board of directors, and on and on and on. All these things have really gotten people's attention. So, a lot of people are paying attention to what's going to happen next. The big issue on the table for USPSA is these suspensions, these bannings. 5 different people so far. If USPSA goes through with this, I'm pretty sure that there's going to be some new organization to oppose USPSA that's going to crop up. I've heard from too many different people that want that to happen. Like, somebody will do it. I don't know who, but somebody will do it. Won't be me, by the way, but somebody will. A lot of high-profile gun industry people have noticed that there's a lot of problems with USPSA, and they're seeing financial opportunity. Honestly, a lot of people are. Just as an aside for other listeners, should there be another organization that crops up or some effort to form an organization, I would just... My involvement with that would be getting people on the same sheet of music, getting the Lucas Bodkins and the Max Leograndises to talk to each other to make sure everybody's together with whatever comes next. That would be what I would do. Because if there's going to be another effort, it should be an effective effort, and it should be a unified effort. In any event, the situation's gotten pretty interesting. The board's in charge of what happens here. They have all the power. They're going to decide what happens next. That's the fact. The board could do some short-term suspensions. They don't really have to admit fault. And then everybody, I think, would just move on. If that's the direction they go, like say, hey, Ben, you're out for 3 months, then you're back in. Or they do that with everybody. Okay, that's kind of punting. I think more issues would drag on and there'd still be a lot of conflict over time. Okay, they could reinstate all the band members, which I don't think they're going to do that, but that would definitely take a lot of wind out of my sails if they did. If they reinstated everyone, I wouldn't have that much to complain about anymore. They could fire Jake and fire up some accountability for USPSA. I doubt they'll go that direction, but I guess that's an option. Most likely, I think they're going to go through with the bannings and send a message loud and clear to all the people watching. And that would be an issue for USPSA. Like they're going to get a reaction if they do something like that. So anyway, that's the situation as I see it. There's a lot of things that have happened over the last year. A lot of things got us to this place. But we'll see what happens next. It should be very, very interesting to see what the board does. Anyway, that's all. I think we'll be back to a more regular practical shooting after dark schedule in the very near future. So if you have questions about shooting, bensteger.com, send me your questions. And we'll get the whole crew back on here and start answering questions very soon.